everybody? We are back with another episode of Coordinated Chaos. It has been a minute. I took a little bit of a break after the Super Bowl pod, but we are back. A lot of things have happened since NFL free agency has kicked off. We are a little over a weekend now, it looks like. And then, of course, we have the draft upcoming. But I want to get straight into some of this free agency stuff. Essentially, I'm going to go through all 32 teams. I'm going to do a winners and losers, just calling it like I see it essentially at this point. So I'm basically going to start. It's going to go alphabetical order, and we're going to go all the way through it. I'm going to kind of talk about some of the players some of these teams have signed and what I think about it, some of my opinions on these players, and if it was a good move for these teams to sign these players before the draft, obviously, because the offseason does not really end this early on in the offseason. We still, like I said, have the draft to deal with. And then there's like a second wave of free agency that kind of happens close to the draft as well as after the draft when teams are trying to hone in on exactly what they want to do to go into the 2024 NFL season. So let me get over to this website here where I'm going to be able to track all of the movement from free agency. And we'll get this thing kicked off with the Arizona Cardinals here. For me, right off the bat, looking at these names, I think the Cardinals are probably a loser thus far. Like I said, free agency's not over, the draft is not over, so maybe they're looking more towards the draft to get some of this stuff done. And that's probably going to be the case for a lot of these teams that I call losers at this point in time, where they just don't have a whole lot of cap space, or they just can't really afford to make some of these moves because they don't have the draft capital to do it whenever they want to try to make a trade or something like that. So a lot of these teams are looking towards the draft to kind of fill out the rest of the roster, and some of these teams are looking to do a little bit of both. But from what I'm seeing here, the Arizona Cardinals right this second are losers. They pretty much just re-signed a lot of their own players. Kelvin Beachum, who is their left tackle, Will Hernandez, starting guard for them, Matt Prater, their kicker. I mean, a lot of just like names that they were already there, and so they're just kind of trying to keep kind of that core together right now on the offensive line. It looks like for the most part. We'll go to the next one, which I think is a big winner thus far in free agency, and that is the Atlanta Falcons. They got a lot of big names on here. They traded for Jonnu Smith from the Patriots. That's a big play there. I think that fits what they want to do. Arthur Smith, the coach of the Falcons there, wants to run the ball a lot. 12 personnel, which means 2 tight ends on the field. You're going to have Jonnu Smith and why can't I think of the rookie's name from this past year? Good Lord, that's crazy. He's a stud, though, obviously. And I think he's going to be a guy that steps up this year in his second year. He did not have a great rookie season necessarily, but I don't think that was really his fault at all. I think that was more along the lines of who they've had at quarterback the last few years. And it's just been a turnstile when it comes to quarterback play there. I don't know if they're going to try to go with Desmond Ridder to play quarterback for them this year, or if they're going to try to go for a veteran later on in free agency, or maybe draft some guy. We just don't know what the Falcons are planning on doing in the draft. But they've signed a lot of good players. Lorenzo Carter here. He is a linebacker, outside linebacker, edge rusher. He's a good player. Chris Lindstrom, they are starting. I think he's the right guard. He is one of the best guards in all of football. He is incredible. They re-signed him to a huge deal. I think he's the highest paid guard in all of football at this point. David Onyemata, guy came over from the Saints, defensive tackle. He is a stud as well. Jesse Bates III, this was a huge one. They gave him the most money that a safety's had, I think, at least in the league. I don't know if it was like in total, as in like the number one safety, contract. But for this offseason, he got paid the most, $16 million a year. That's a huge contract for them. And Jesse Bates is a very, very good player. And that the Falcons defense was struggling quite a bit this past season. So that is a huge get for them, especially, adding David Onyemata as well. Caleb McGarry, their tackle, they re-signed him as well. So they're kind of trying to keep the O-line together, adding to the defense. It's adding to the trenches in general, and that's just a good idea no matter which way you slice it or dice it. Caden Ellis, linebacker from the Saints, solid player. That's going to help the defense once again. They got a backup quarterback in Taylor Heineke, who I think could probably come in there and probably play better than Desmond Ridder, but they're probably going to try to give him a chance since he's a young guy, but we'll see how that pans out. We'll go to the next team. Baltimore Ravens. Oh man, they are definitely a loser thus far in free agency because they're being held hostage essentially by this whole situation with Lamar Jackson. They have no idea how much money they're actually going to have because of the fact that he is, trying to get his new contract. They're trying to figure out what to do in that situation, and so they can't really make a lot of moves right now because they just don't know what kind of money they're looking at when it comes to the salary cap. So they're kind of stuck in a limbo, and they haven't really done a whole lot. They've re-signed Justice Hill, who was already there running back for them. They signed Trayvon Mullen, who was a cornerback, who's a solid player, and that's pretty much it. I mean, not a whole lot of big names on the list for the Ravens thus far in free agency. Next, Buffalo Bills. Man, this one's a tough one to decipher. I want to say it's like a slight edge towards a winner, but like some people could probably see it as a loser when it comes to what they've done thus far in free agency. They've re-signed Jordan Poyer. He is a good player. He's had a little bit of injury history the last few years. He's getting up there in age, but I think they had to do something there. They were losing both their safeties before Jordan Poyer came back. Micah Hyde's probably not going to re-sign there. He's had a lot of bad injury luck the last few years, and I think they're probably done with that situation, unfortunately for him. The next biggest thing I think for them was, and it might even be more important than Jordan Poyer, they signed from the Cowboys Connor McGovern. He was a guard/center, very versatile interior offensive lineman, and I think that's really going to help. The Buffalo Bills offensive line has struggled, I feel like, the last 2 years, and that's cost the Bills a lot of games, the last few years as well. And I think in order to maximize what Josh Allen can do for your team, you have to protect him and not make him just, run around back there and potentially injure himself like he is potentially prone to do, considering how much they already run the ball with him with, quarterback design runs and whatnot. He always takes on contact. He never like slides or anything, hardly. He's just he's a reckless, violent runner when he gets going, and so the last thing you want to do is for him to get more hits in the pocket because he's already taking hits when he's running. So just shoring up that offensive line is going to be huge for the Bills. So that's why I kind of edge towards winner, because at least they're trying to do that. And like I said, they're re-signing a lot of their core pieces. Like I said, Jordan Poyer there. They re-signed Matt Milano as well, so that's pretty nice for them. Let's go to the next team, Panthers. I've already liked what they've done all of this offseason thus far with the hiring of Frank Reich, their entire coaching staff, Thomas Brown as OC, EJ Evero as their defensive coordinator. He is a stud as well. They got, just their coaching staff is legit, and I think this gives them the best shot to really take and develop a quarterback in the first round, and obviously they have made the trade up from 9-1 to do that with the Chicago Bears. They pretty much mortgaged the future just to go ahead and get them a franchise quarterback this offseason, and in my opinion, I think that guy is going to be CJ Stroud. And I think that's probably going to be a good fit. I mean, he's a great pocket passer. The ball comes out of his hand it pops out of his hand. He can really sling it, and there was a lot of question if he could really run the ball, if he can make plays out of structure, and he really showed that in that last game against Georgia in the semifinals of the college football season this year. And I think a lot of teams saw that and they decided, okay, this guy is pretty legit, and I think we can really do something with him. And I think the Panthers are heading in that direction specifically. I don't think they're going to be looking at a Bryce Young. I don't think they're going to be looking at an Anthony Richardson, kind of a project to deal with there. I think they want to hit the ground running with a guy like CJ Stroud, who I think can start week 1 for them. But they don't have to necessarily do that, because one of the other moves that they made was they signed Andy Dalton. That's a pretty good deal. He's a solid veteran. I think he can really show a CJ Stroud the ropes whenever he gets in the building. Like I said, there's no pressure to start CJ the first week of the season if you don't want to, because you can start Andy Dalton. Do the whole play Andy Dalton a few games. If Andy Dalton kind of plays bad at some point, the team / fan base will be calling for CJ Stroud to come on the field. And honestly, that creates some hype and just some juice when it comes to, being in the middle of a football season if your team's not doing that well. At the very least, if you're not winning games, you want to at least be excited for the future when you're a fan base of a team that has a rookie quarterback. So I think they can play that sort of game where you can potentially start the veteran and then go to the rookie when things are starting to look a little bit bleak, if that's even, how the season ends up going for them. Let's see, any others. So also the Panthers signed Miles Sanders from the Eagles. I think it's a solid signing. He is a guy that I'm curious to see how good he is outside of an offense where there's a running quarterback, where that takes a lot of pressure off the running back, because the defense really has to hone in on a guy like Jalen Hurts whenever he can potentially pull the ball and run it himself. So he's been very effective the last few years with Jalen Hurts as the quarterback, and I don't know if it's a coincidence that that's the case or not, but he's an explosive guy. He can really... He's a guy that can take it like 60 yards to the house, if the right situation, presents itself. But I'm a little bit worried as well about the fact that sometimes his vision is a little bit questionable. He can bounce the run to the outside sometimes when it's not necessary, and what's more necessary for that play is to cut it back inside and just put his head down and get 2 or 3 more extra yards instead of bouncing it outside and potentially losing a yard. There's many times the last, however many years we've had Miles Sanders, I guess it's 4, that, there was situations where he did that. He bounced it outside, and if he would have just cut it back inside, put his head down, we would have got a first down, and then it ends up being 4th down or whatever it may be in that situation. And so he can potentially hurt you in those situations, but I think overall he's a good running back, and I think it's a solid signing. They definitely need a running back. I think to complement him, Chuba Hubbard is still there in Carolina, and I think that's probably a solid little duo they have. Let's see, they re-signed Bradley Bozeman, their center. Julian Love, it looks like, well, no, I don't think Julian, that's weird. Is Julian Love on the Panthers now? I hadn't seen that one. Adam Thielen just signed with the Panthers as well, which is, a big deal when it comes to if you're getting a rookie quarterback in there. You want to have a reliable target for him, since they traded away DJ Moore in the trade as well. They signed Von Bell as a safety. That is going to be a nice little duo with him and Jeremy Chin. So the defense for the Panthers can be pretty solid this season, especially with the defensive coordinator coming in. I really like what he did with the Broncos last season. They have talent on the defense. It's a matter of putting it all together and then see if the offense can kind of catch up a little bit, even with a rookie quarterback potentially being in there. All right, next team, another huge winner, huge spender in free agency is the Chicago Bears. Obviously, they got DJ Moore in that trade. That's huge for Justin Fields and, that wide receiving core, which has been pretty bad the last few years. Tremaine Edmonds, great linebacker coming out of the Buffalo Bills. He is still extremely young. I think he's only like 24 still. Like, he came in the league at somehow he came in the league at 19 or 20 years old or something like that. It was insane. But he is a humongous linebacker that can really cover ground. He is a great player. They signed TJ Edwards from the Eagles, so they got 2 basically middle linebackers. I don't know how they're going to deploy them, but it's essentially one of those situations where they can just, plug and play those guys wherever they want. I think it's going to be very good for them. Let's see, who else did they get? They signed Robert Tonyan. Not a huge deal, but a solid, number 2 tight end there. And then they have Deontay Foreman, who they signed away from the Panthers. He was a solid north-south runner. He's not much of a guy that catches balls out of the backfield or anything, but they lost David Montgomery, so they needed somebody to replace him. So solid signing by them for that. Nate Davis, they signed a guard, which obviously we've seen how bad the Chicago Bears offensive line has been the last few years, and I think that's probably a good idea for them to get help on that side of the ball as well. Those are pretty much the big names there for the Bears, but I think I like what they're doing thus far. They're trying to shore up that defense, which was very leaky last year. And then obviously trying to help the offensive line and offensive weaponry for Justin Fields moving forward. Next team, the Cincinnati Bengals. I think I have to go with a win here. I think they're winners. And I think that all boils down to what they did with Orlando Brown Jr. They got him. Basically, I think he flew his market a little bit too hot when it came to free agency. I think he thought he could get more than he could. He turned down a big deal from the Chiefs. I think it was mid-season actually, because he wanted to test free agency and see if he could make more, and it ended up he couldn't. And so the Chiefs moved off of him, which we'll get to later. and that forced his hand essentially to sign with whoever kind of wanted him at that point. And the Bengals stepped up and they signed him, and now Jonah Williams, their former left tackle, is requesting a trade, obviously because he's not going to necessarily start there. So crazy situation for the Bengals, but I think it's a good one because Orlando Brown, I think, is better than Jonah Williams, so it's an automatic upgrade. And Joe Burrow still needs help on the offensive line. It's still been very, just wishy-washy the last few years. It seems like sometimes they have streaks where they're good and where they're absolutely awful. So I think that's a good move there. They re-signed Jermaine Pratt, their linebacker. That was a solid move. I don't think there was anybody else on the free agent market in linebacker territory other than like Tremaine Edmonds that I would have rather had than Jermaine Pratt at that point. So solid to get your guy back there. That was pretty much it for the Bengals, but I still think they're winners. Next team, Browns. I don't know, man. I guess the Browns are winners in this one. This is another one that's a little bit weird. They signed Juan Thornhill. They cut John Johnson III after giving him a pretty big contract. I think it was last year or 2 years ago. So they gave Dalvin Tomlinson a defensive tackle. They gave him a lot of money, which I think is a good idea. Their defensive tackle room was very small last year. They couldn't really stop the run. They were getting smoked in the run game. Specifically, you remember a game against the Chargers where Austin Eckler just gashed them for tons of yardage. So Dalvin Tomlinson, huge run stopper, can push the pocket a little bit. So solid signing for them there. Re-signed Sione Takitaki, linebacker. They want to keep that core together a little bit there. But pretty much that's the biggest moves that they made. They also signed Obo Okoronkwo, defensive end. He is a solid player as well. Forgot about him. But yeah, the Browns, I think, are winners at this point. It's just they haven't signed a whole lot of huge names necessarily, but I think it's moving in the right direction for them. I think they're going to, kind of fill the rest of their roster out with the draft. All right, next team, man. This one, I regretfully have to say they are huge winners in the offseason this year, and that is going to be the Dallas Cowboys. First, they went ahead and franchise tagged Tony Pollard. They cut Ezekiel Elliott, which I think was a smart move because they were going to be spending like over $27 million in total for 2 running backs, which is just a ridiculous amount to be paying running backs in 2023 when, they're not that valuable at this point in time. And then they re-signed Donovan Wilson. He's a solid safety. He makes plays. He can really tackle. They traded for Stephon Gilmore. That was a huge one. Their cornerback 2 situation last year was very, very bad after there were some injuries for them. Pretty much you just had Diggs on one side and you could really attack the other side of the field whenever you wanted to, essentially. So Stephon Gilmore locking down the other side is going to be huge for their defense. That sucks for me because I really like Stephon Gilmore, and I think he is still a very good player. He is a little bit long in the tooth. He's 32 as well, about to turn 33, I believe. He's such a smart player too, so I'm pretty scared about that. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I don't think that the Cowboys are better than the Eagles at this point in time. Not even really that close. But like Stephon Gilmore is one of those huge moves where you're like, man, that could change some things. Obviously, as long as he stays healthy and whatnot. They re-signed Leighton Vander Esch. Linebacker, he played well for them last year, so I think that's a good move. They re-signed Cooper Rush, solid backup to Dak. He, played well in his absence last year. And then they traded for Brandon Cooks. That was a huge deal as well. Kind of the same situation with the, as the DBs last year whenever you didn't have that cornerback 2 lockdown. The Cowboys didn't really have a good wide receiver 2. Michael Gallup was coming off that ACL, and he just was not playing as well as we had seen in the past. So now they have Brandon Cooks and Michael Gallup. So I think Michael Gallup, another year removed from that ACL injury. Brandon Cooks, still a good wide receiver, still fast. So that's going to help their offense out, in addition to, obviously CeeDee Lamb. So unfortunately for me as an Eagles fan, NFC East fans in general, the Cowboys got better this offseason already, and the draft is still yet to come. So we'll move on. Next team, Denver Broncos, another huge spender. I have to say they're winners here because I think they're doing exactly what Sean Payton wants, which is to build a team around Russell Wilson where he can feel a little bit more comfortable than he has the last year, obviously, because he looked terrible last year. They got Mike McGlinchey, right tackle, huge guy. They went and got Ben Powers, an offensive guard. I think they're just trying to put some big guys in front of Russell and kind of convince him that he is protected and he can stand in the pocket and make plays like he did in Seattle, even though Seattle never really had a good, offensive line either. But I think he just struggled last year with looking at the rush a little bit too much and missing open wide receivers when they were there. They went out and got Samaje Perine. I like that addition. Guy can catch the ball out of the backfield. They went and got Zach Allen from the Cardinals. I think he's a good defensive end / D tackle. He can do a lot of things. He's very versatile there. Let's see. Anybody else? I mean, they signed Jarrett Stidham away from the Raiders, which I think was probably a good idea considering if Russell struggles again. Sean Payton's a guy that I guess trusts what Jarrett Stidham put on tape, and he went out and snagged a guy that he can trust if Russell struggles once again. But yeah, those are pretty much the big names for the Broncos, but I think they've done a good job so far. Next team, man, this team looks like they're going for it, and I have to say they're winners as well. At first, in free agency, they were doing a whole lot of just re-signing their own players, which is good to bring kind of your core players back, whenever they do hit free agency. But they have now signed some people from the outside that I think is a great idea. That's the Detroit Lions. They brought in Cam Sutton from the Pittsburgh Steelers, cornerback. They needed help in the secondary very badly last season, so brought in him. They also brought in Emmanuel Mosley coming off an ACL, so we'll see how much playing time he ends up getting because he's still recovering from an ACL. But he's a good player. They signed David Montgomery. That was a huge one. A lot of people were, at first, when I looked at the numbers and what Jamal Williams did last year, I was like, why would you not just re-sign Jamal Williams to do exactly what he did last year? But when you start looking at it like from a different perspective, David Montgomery is just a better overall running back, and you just can't really trust the health of some of the other running backs in that backfield. Unfortunately. And so I think DeAndre Swift is a good player, but injuries have really ruined a lot of his, just potential. And I think if he can just stay healthy, he is an incredible back. But David Montgomery takes a little bit of pressure off of DeAndre Swift. For fantasy people, that is not a good idea, having both of them in the backfield again. That's going to make things a lot complicated, a lot more complicated, I should say, going into the fantasy season this year. But for the Detroit Lions as a team, a team that really can't trust Swift to stay healthy, David Montgomery can go in there and he can do everything. He can catch the ball out of the backfield. He can run between the tackles. He is a good overall running back. He's very efficient. So I think that's a good signing. They brought back a lot of their own guys, like Will Harris, Craig Reynolds. They signed Chauncey Gardner-Johnson away from the Eagles. That actually happened last night, and it's a weird story, but his deal is not very good. It's a 1 year, like $8 million deal or something like that, $6 million guaranteed or something. I don't even know. It's an okay deal, but it looks like the Eagles gave him a chance to get more earlier on in free agency, and him and his agent turned it down, and the agent went on Twitter last night and was trying to defend taking this 1 year deal with the Detroit Lions rather than taking the 3 year long-term contract from the Eagles that was presented to them earlier in the season, which made the whole move look very pathetic and very bad. And I don't think that guy should have a job anymore when it comes to Chauncey. I think he should probably fire that guy. Because if you're going on Twitter trying to defend what you did for your client, that is not a good look. That is really stupid and really whack. But yeah, Chauncey, very good player. Sad to see him go from the Eagles. He's one of those guys that gives you some attitude on defense. He's one of those finger waggers. He talks trash. He's a fun player. He had 6 picks last year, so he played great for us in a transition from nickel corner to safety last year. And I think the Lions are getting a very good player. Let's see, who else did the Lions? They got Graham Glasgow. I mean, that's just a re-signing, but they needed to shore up that offensive line. He's been a guy that has been very good for them the last few years, and that offensive line is one of the better ones, probably a top 5 offensive line in all of football. So, just putting some players around Jared Goff and that offense, and then putting some more players to add to the defense, I think the Detroit Lions are definitely heading in the right direction right now. Next team, Green Bay Packers, definitely a loser right now. The only person of real note that they have re-signed is Keyshawn Nixon, who is a cornerback technically, but he's more of a return specialist. He's very explosive, so that's a good signing for them. But other than that, they didn't do anything really so far. So I guess they're going to have to go to the draft, do everything. And obviously they're dealing with the Aaron Rodgers situation right now, but that's probably taking up most of their time because they don't know what's going to happen with that. But next team, Houston Texans. I'm going to have to go with a winner here. They signed Robert Woods, solid veteran, whatever, not a huge deal. Jimmy Ward, once again, solid veteran for the defense, a guy that DeMeco Ryans knows well. He had him last year in San Francisco. That makes sense. Case Keenum as a quarterback. They're probably going to draft one in the first round this year at number 2 overall. So he's one of those guys, kind of like an Andy Dalton transition period, maybe bridge quarterback. They signed, Shaq Mason. They actually traded for him from the Bucks. That's nice. Just a solid offensive guard to add to the team there. Other than that, they got Chase Winovich, Noah Brown, wide receiver from the Cowboys, who was very solid for them. He was like their wide receiver 3, and he played well. Not anything crazy to say about him, but solid player. Re-signed Scott Quisenberry, their center, so that's solid. Like I said, just keeping that offensive line together. But yeah, I think the Texans overall are a winner. They didn't do anything like crazy necessarily, but I think what they've done is pretty solid so far. Indianapolis Colts. I gotta say that I think they're losers thus far. Not really, gauging the market of that number 1 overall pick and some of those top picks in the NFL draft this season, and letting the Panthers kind of jump them to get in that position was not a good start for them, in this offseason. But what they've done so far, there's not a whole lot of big names here. Samson Ebukam, he was a guy, I think, from the San Francisco 49ers defensive end. He's a solid player. They signed him. A lot of re-signing Ashton Doolin. They signed Taven Bryan, who was a defensive end for the Jaguars for a while there. They signed Gardner Minshew. I guess kind of going to be another one of the situations where there's a potential, bridge quarterback for a rookie if they draft one. So Colts haven't done a whole lot so far, but they do have draft capital, so they'll probably look towards the draft for the rest of their all-season additions. Next team, Jacksonville Jaguars. Let's see. I think I have them down as a winner. They re-signed or franchise tagged Evan Ingram. He played very well for them last year after starting out his career in New York, and it was a disaster there. He couldn't catch the football, and now all of a sudden he can. Change of scenery does a lot for players these days. Roy Robertson Harris re-signing there. He was a solid defensive lineman for them last year. I like that. Other than that, they haven't done a whole lot, but I think those 2 moves are all they really needed thus far. And I guess if you want to go ahead and say that, technically Calvin Ridley is an addition for them, kind of free agency-wise, when they traded for him last year. He couldn't play, but he's eligible to come back this year. I think that kind of puts him over the top to make them a winner in free agency / just off-season thus far. Kansas City Chiefs, I got them for a winner. This one is mostly because of their move to not really cave necessarily to all of Orlando Brown's, demands essentially. So they got creative and they snagged away from the Jaguars Jawan Taylor, who was their right tackle. The Chiefs are going to convert him to a left tackle and let him play in the place of Orlando Brown. So apparently, if Andy Reid likes a guy that well to think he can transition very easily to left tackle, then I think I like the addition as well. They got Charles Omenihu, good edge player. They lost Frank Clark, so they needed some guy to kind of replace his production there. They signed Drew Tranquil and Mike Edwards. Some solid stuff there. Nothing crazy, but I still think they're winners because of the shoring up the O-line once again whenever they've had, 2, both of their bookends end up leaving, and now they've at least figured out something for one of them. Next team is the Raiders. Man, I am looking at this list of players, the Raiders, and I'm going to have to say they're losers thus far. They franchised Josh Jacobs, which they had to do because he's just a stud, and they really don't have anybody else in the backfield there. They got Jimmy Garoppolo. Yeah, he's not as good as Derek Carr, in my opinion. But maybe the chemistry between him and McDaniels is worth it for the Raiders to do, since he was in New England. Both of them were in New England. They know the system, whatever. But I just don't know what they expect to do in the AFC West with with the Chiefs and the Chargers and the Broncos with Sean Payton now. I don't know if they're going to be better, but they potentially can be. I just feel like they're still going to be bottom dwellers in that division, and I just don't see the point in kind of pushing your chips into the middle there and getting a Jimmy G, a Jacoby Myers, a Marcus Epps away from the Eagles. Like, all these players, I guess they're trying to build something, obviously, and so I can't fault them for that, but I just don't know what they think they're going to do in that division. Just pray for the Chargers to have injury so they get one of the wild cards. I don't know, man. They're going to have to have a lot of things go right for them to make the playoffs next year. Next team, Chargers. I got to go with, I think they're losers. The only thing of real note that I guess two players that I kind of like. Eric Kendricks, obviously a longtime Viking linebacker. The Chargers, I think, do need linebacker help, but he's a little bit long in the tooth, but I think he's still a good player, so that's a solid signing. And then Morgan Fox, defensive lineman. I think they snagged him from the Panthers. He has been a pretty solid, journeyman defensive line kind of depth piece for a lot of teams in the last few years, so I like that signing. But other than that, that's pretty much it. So I think I have the Chargers as losers. Los Angeles Rams, definitely losers. They have not done really anything. They don't have any draft capital because of them basically mortgaging the future for Matthew Stafford a couple years ago. They traded away Jalen Ramsey, so they don't have him anymore. They've lost a lot of free agents, so they are looking a little bit worse for wear, and I feel bad for Rams fans, whichever ones exist. I don't know how many of those exist, but there's not a whole lot of them anyway, so whatever. Next team, Miami Dolphins, the team that traded for Jalen Ramsey. They are having, I think, a winning type free agency period right now. Obviously, the Jalen Ramsey thing is huge. Jalen Ramsey, Xavier Howard, Javon Holland, that secondary is very good thus far. Let's see, who else? David Long Jr. from the Titans, a good linebacker. It looks like they're pushing all their chips to the middle and they're going for it this season, and I think that's probably a smart move. They got Tua on his fifth-year option. Obviously, they got to try to keep him upright, keep him out of concussion protocol because he's just been prone to getting concussed the last few years now. And if he stays upright and he can play pretty much all the games this season, they're going to be a tough team, man. That offense is already obviously very explosive. They re-signed Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson Jr. And the defense is now solid with good linebacker play, very good D-line play, and very good secondary play. So they look like they're really going for it, and I don't blame them because there's a very small window here, and I think they can get it done. Minnesota Vikings. This one's a little bit crazy. I want to say they're winners here. I think they're winners. Byron Murphy on a 2-year deal. They overpaid him a little bit, but he's a very good player. I think it's a very good signing. Garrett Bradbury, re-signing him, their center. Marcus Davenport, 1-year deal away from the Saints there. I think he's a solid player as well. Alexander Madison, re-signed him. I think that's a solid signing as well. They just did a lot of really so Byron Murphy is obviously the best signing there, and then the rest of the guys I think are just kind of the B- signings, and I think that's what you got to do sometimes in free agency is just take what you can get, not overpay for players that are gonna gonna be leaving eventually. Just kind of standing your ground when you have to. I think they've learned from their mistakes, and I think they're doing the right thing so far. Let's see. Next team, the Patriots. Man, I like a lot of the players on the Patriots. I just don't know if I can determine whether they're a winner or loser in free agency thus far. I'll say that they're winners. They're re-signing Jabril Peppers. They're re-signing Jonathan Jones, two good players there. They're signing Juju Smith-Schuster. I think that's a solid signing for the potential growth of Mac Jones. Bill O'Brien will be the offensive coordinator for the Patriots once again, and I think that's probably a step in the right direction once again for the Patriots offense. So that's solid. They signed James Robinson. I think they overpaid for him a little bit, considering what he's put on tape the last year, essentially, after his Achilles injury. They signed Mike Gesicki to kind of replace, what was his name? Why am I blanking all these players today? The guy from Tennessee, not Tennessee. The guy that went to the Falcons, whatever. You know who I'm talking about now. I can't even think of that. Re-signing Mack Wilson, good player, coming out of Alabama, probably like 4 years ago now. I think that's a solid signing as well. Once again, kind of like the Vikings, they did a whole lot of like B+-ish type moves. But once again, that's what you got to do, and then fill out the rest of the roster through the draft. New Orleans Saints, I have to say they're winners here just because they actually finally got a quarterback. They've been in QB purgatory since Drew Brees retired. They got Derek Carr now. Re-signed Juwan Johnson. He was a good tight end for them. Signed Kalen Saunders from the Saints, big guy. They've lost a lot of big guys up front, and so signing another one to kind of replace some of the production up front in the Saints D-line was a good signing there. They re-signed Michael Thomas. We'll see if him and Derek Carr can click, and if he still has something kind of in the bag there. They signed Teno Passanio from the Chiefs. He was a pretty solid player, his pretty much his entire career, defensive end there. And then they signed Jamal Williams, who I think would be a good complement to Alvin Kamara as long as he is healthy. Alvin Kamara may be facing a suspension from that weird incident he had at the Pro Bowl maybe like 2 years ago now or something like that. So he may be facing like a 4 to 6 game suspension. So Jamal Williams is going to get a lot of work in the first few weeks of the season. It's going to be an interesting fantasy, debate on where he should probably go in drafts based on that. But yeah, I think the Saints are winners thus far. Next team, the New York Giants. I'm going to have to go winners, but like barely. Daniel Jones, they had to re-sign him. They basically had to do something there. I think, in my opinion, I would have rather franchise tagged him, let Saquon go, and see what you actually have with Daniel Jones another year under his belt in that system with added weapons, potentially like a, Darren Waller, obviously. They traded for him. So I think with the additional weapons, Daniel Jones can only get better, I believe. So they pretty much just re-signed a lot of their players. Isaiah Hodgins, they signed Paris Campbell. I think that's a nice little upside signing potentially. Re-signed Darius Slayton. Like I said, a lot of their former players. Sterling Shepard, re-signed him. Bobby Okereke, or Okereke, however you pronounce that. They signed him, linebacker. Big deal. 4 years, $40 million. I don't know if he's worth that much, but they definitely needed help in that linebacker room. So I think that's just a good signing in general. If you have the money to spend it, sometimes you just got to do it. So Giants, I think, are winners, but just kind of edging that direction. Next team, New York Jets. If they get Aaron Rodgers, whenever that happens to go through, they're going to be winners for me no matter what. They get Allen Lazard, basically because of Aaron Rodgers. They re-signed Quincy Williams, who is the brother of Quinnen Williams, so they're both still on the defense. That's huge for them. Chuck Clark, they traded for him. I think he's a good safety. That's a solid move. They got Solomon Thomas, which is a very familiar face for Robert Saleh. I think that's probably a solid signing for them as well. I think Jets are winners as long as they can go ahead and get this thing done with Aaron Rodgers. Next team, Philadelphia Eagles, my team, of course. This is one of those situations where, honestly, going into the free agency, I was not prepared for the amount of people that I thought were going to have to leave here. But Howie Roseman has done a very admirable job of keeping a lot of the core together. They lost some big players like Javon Hargrave. That was a huge loss in the first day of free agency. They lost TJ Edwards. Not as perturbed about that loss as a lot of people were. I think he was a solid player, but I think he had limitations as a player as well. So they lost both of them, obviously, but they have figured out a way to get a lot of the core players back. Jason Kelsey's coming back for 1 year. Fletcher Cox is coming back for 1 year. Brandon Graham's coming back for 1 year. A lot of big-time Eagles legends, leaders in the locker room are coming back. James Bradbury gets re-signed as well. That was huge. Didn't think that was going to happen when free agency began. They re-signed Boston Scott, giant killer, got to do it. They signed Rashad Penny, which I thought was an incredible signing. He's only getting $600,000 guaranteed. I love this signing because of the upside here. Basically, Howie Roseman's taking a flyer on this guy. He's not spending a lot of money on him. And when he's healthy, he is better than Miles Sanders. That is a fact. He is a better runner. He has better vision. He can catch the ball better out of the backfield than Miles Sanders ever has. And it really just comes down to health. Can he stay healthy for an entire season, or maybe even like 80% of a season? Just like have maybe one little injury instead of like a season-ending one. It's going to be huge to see if that's possible. If Rashad Penny plays, 80-90% of games for the Eagles this year, he literally might lead the league in rushing. I'm not even kidding. That's not hyperbole. The Eagles offensive line blocking offensive line is one of the best in all of football. They're probably the best O-line in general in all of football, even though they have lost Isaac Seumalo. They're probably just going to slide Cam Jurgens, their second-round pick, last year, right into that role, and we should just keep rolling on that side. They also kind of restructured / re-signed, or extended, I should say, Darius Slay after a little bit of a quibble where they thought they were going to potentially release him, and then Darius Slay probably didn't find a whole lot of people that really wanted him for the money he thought he could get on the market, essentially. And so he came back. Obviously, he's a huge deal to come back there. Locking up both of our outside corners is a big deal, which basically gives us the freedom to lose a guy like Chauncey Gardner-Johnson and focus on maybe getting one of those safeties in the draft this year, maybe getting one of these late season cuts from another team, which I think is a possibility. And then the next few, Greedy Williams, we got Greedy Williams from the Browns. I think that's a nice depth cornerback piece, just because with two cornerbacks that are in the age 30 seasons, and so Darius Slay's 32, Bradbury's going to be 30, I think, during the season this year. So those two guys, they stayed perfectly healthy all of last season, which is something you just don't see very often. And so I think they don't want to test their luck again and just not have a whole lot of depth behind them again. And so Greedy Williams can step in and start for your team. So that's a nice signing. We also got Marcus Mariota as a backup, which I think is a good signing there. He's a guy that can run the offense very similarly to Jalen Hurts whenever or if he ever gets hurt. Last year, obviously, he had to miss a couple games there, and Gardner Minshew stepped in and played admirably, but he just wasn't the same quarterback. They couldn't really keep the same offense. They had to read RPOs in the offense still, and you just don't think about Gardner Minshew running off of those at all. Marcus Mariota at least gives you a scare when it comes to that. So he's the same type of quarterback-ish. He's just not as good, obviously, as Hurts. But I think I like him a lot as a backup. That's pretty much it for the Eagles. I definitely think they're winners. Pittsburgh Steelers. Let's see. I think I have to go with winners here, and that's because they re-signed Larry Ogunjobi. I think that's a huge deal. Patrick Peterson comes over from the Vikings. He is very long in the tooth, but he's still a solid player. He's just not what Cam Sutton was, so it's a downgrade in that regard, but at least they got a kind of replacement. Nate Herbig, he actually was a former guard for the Eagles, played with the Jets last year. He is a very solid guard. He's not I would say he's kind of average-ish, but that's better than what they've had the last few seasons in Pittsburgh, so that's a solid signing. They signed Isaac Seumalo away from the Eagles, as I was saying. So that's another guard that they can plug in there and protect Kenny Pickett. So I think they're heading in the right direction. San Francisco 49ers. Obviously, huge deal. Shock of free agency. They signed away Javon Hargrave from the Eagles. This makes their D-line ridiculous. Can you think about a D-line with Javon Hargrave, Eric Armstead, Javon Kinlaw, Bosa? Who else do you want to that D-line is going to be scary next year. They signed Sam Darnold, which I think is a solid signing since they just don't have quarterbacks right now. Brock Purdy just now got his, a week or so ago or 2 weeks ago, just now got his UCL tear surgery, which I don't think the timeline is going to be very good to him. I think he's going to miss majority of the season. Trey Lance coming off that broken leg / ankle. So they needed a solid guy that's going to be healthy day one for them this season. And I think Sam Darnold can be that guy. I trust Kyle Shanahan to, put together something where Sam Darnold feels comfortable in that offense. Other than that, they just signed, they re-signed Tayshaun Gibson. I think it's a solid signing there. They signed Cleveland Farrell, which he was kind of a bust coming out of the draft from Clemson. Drafted, I think, like 2 or 3 overall by the Raiders, years ago now, and it just never worked out for him. Maybe he can kind of revitalize his career in San Francisco. But yeah, just solid signings other than that. But, obviously made the biggest splash in free agency in this offseason. Next team, Seattle Seahawks. They re-signed Geno Smith, huge deal, obviously. Draymond Jones, huge player from the Broncos, very good defensive lineman. Re-signed Jarran Reed. Their D-line is now solid. They struggled last year with run defense. I think they can probably shore that up a little bit this season. Other than that, Devin Bush, okay signing from the Pittsburgh Steelers. Nothing huge, but I still think the Seattle Seahawks are winners. There's a lot more winners than losers in this free agency. I think a lot of teams did a very good job. Tampa Bay Buccaneers, this one, man, I think they might be losers in this free agency. Just because I don't think they lost Tom Brady, obviously that's huge. They've re-signed Jamel Dean, which is a good signing, a very good signing. They signed Baker Mayfield. I don't know if that's going to work or not. I kind of hope it does, just for for the sake of Mike Evans and Chris Godwin and them, unless they get traded, and then I'm okay with that situation. I just hope it works out for them, because I don't want to see some of their prime be wasted by just bad quarterback play and a bad team around them. They re-signed Levante David, which I thought was a big deal, because I thought he was going to be gone, but he's a little bit long in the tooth as well. He's like 33, so I don't think they got better by any stretch, but they didn't get much worse, I should say. I guess you could say the downgrade from Tom Brady to Baker Mayfield is much worse, but I don't know. I think they're losers, unfortunately. Tennessee Titans, they've had a low-key free agency. I think I still have to designate them as losers, though. They signed Andre Dillard, who was a backup left tackle for the Eagles the last few years. He was kind of a bust, essentially, because we basically started Jordan Mailata, who was a 7th-round pick, over him. A couple years ago, we gave him a big deal. But I think he's turned into a much better player than he was when he was drafted, and we basically couldn't play him for the Eagles. They signed Azeez Al-Shaair from the San Francisco 49ers. That was a nice little pickup to kind of mitigate the loss of David Long Jr. Other than that, I think they're pretty much just, I don't know. Well, they signed Arden Key, not a bad player last year for the Jaguars as well. I still think they're losers. They're losing a lot of pieces right now. Next team, Washington Commanders. I think they're winners. They re-signed Daron Payne. That was a huge deal. They signed Andrew Wiley. I think that's a little bit overrated, but they needed, help on the O-line, so that's a decent signing there. They signed Nick Gates, solid center/guard versatility guy from the Giants. They signed Jacoby Brissett. This is the most reason why I think they're winners in this situation, because I think they can really start Jacoby Brissett, and he's going to be better than any quarterback they've had very recently. I think he's going to win the job starting this year. I don't think Sam Howell is going to step it up and just really take the job from Jacoby Brissett at this point. So I think Brissett's going to start, and I think that's going to be a solid starter for them. When you're throwing to Terry McLaurin and what's the guy from Penn State? Dude, I'm blanking on guys' names I don't for whatever reason today. But basically, their wide receiving core is solid. Their running back situation is solid. I think their offense can be very good with Jacoby Brissett just kind of facilitating that offense. Their defense is pretty solid, and they've done a good job of re-signing a lot of their players. And so I think moving forward, the Commanders are going to be winners, and they obviously can fill the roster up with some young talent in the draft as well. That pretty much wraps it up for all the teams, man. It was kind of a lot. That was a mouthful to get out there. There's a lot of teams that did a lot of good things. Like I said, there's a lot more winners this year than losers in free agency. But there's reasons for all that kind of thing. But yeah, that pretty much just wraps it up. I appreciate everybody listening and tuning in. Please subscribe to our channel. Please stay tuned for all kinds of new social media stuff on TikTok, on YouTube, on Instagram, on Twitter. I'm on all that stuff, so please go and follow me on that stuff. And once again, we will see you later. Peace.